Real leaders leave a legacy. They capture the hearts and minds of their teams. Their origin story puts the safety and well-being of their people first. Great companies ubiquitously have safe yet productive operations. For those companies, safety is an investment, not a cost for the C-suite. It's a real topic of daily focus. This is The Safety Guru with your host, Eric Michrowski, a globally recognized ops and safety guru, public speaker, and author. Are you ready to leave a safety legacy? Your legacy success story begins now.
Hi, and welcome to The Safety Guru. I'm your host, Eric Michrowski, and today I'm very excited to have back with me Dr. Josh Williams. Dr. Josh Williams is a partner with Propulo Consulting who brings an incredible history of success, assessing and transforming safety cultures through a multitude of different industries and approaches. His experience extends across behavioral safety, cognitive psychology, as well as human performance tools. He's worked in this space for well over 20 years with had phenomenal success across industries. He's authored a book and is also a Cambridge Center Award winner for behavioral research. Josh, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So today I want to talk about a really important topic. I've been getting a lot of questions on this. It's really around behavior-based safety and what next? How do you make this more successful? So maybe if you can give a brief overview in terms of some of the background behind behavior-based safety and its early successes that you've seen.
It's been around a long time. I was in graduate school in the mid-'90s, and it was already, midpoint of trajectory in terms of being throughout the U.S. and beyond, Canada and beyond. Lots of companies doing behavioral safety at that point. It started originally with a guy named Scott Geller and also Tom Kraus. They were kind of on the forefront in the early 80s, really. So it's been around a long time, and the idea behind it was fairly simple, and that is most injuries have a behavioral component. And what these guys were doing, what they kind of started was, okay, well, if that's the case, then why don't we list all the important, behaviors on a checklist and see how we're doing and go around just and observe. And if we're doing things more safely more often, it's less likely somebody's going to get hurt. So that was the logic behind it. And then there was just a mountain of research. For all these interventions and all these, I've got a bookshelf here, Eric, of good to great and all these books and wonderful information. But when you want to get down to science and looking at behavior change, the field of behavioral science is chock full of studies, empirical studies, meta-analyses showing the benefits of behavioral type intervention. So that's one of the reasons it's been around 30, 40 years is because there's science behind it. So when done correctly, it's a powerful tool to improve culture and prevent those serious injuries and fatalities.
Absolutely. And I think that the topic that I most often hear, and I think it has to do with, because it's been around for a very long time. Obviously, if you haven't already implemented behavior-based safety, in most cases, this is probably something that you really should be looking at. But a lot of organizations have implemented some great behavior-based safeties. They've pushed and had amazing outcomes and improvements. But often what I hear about is they push and they plateau. So what I want to talk to you about today is a little bit about what's missing. So obviously great successes, organizations have improved, they've pushed forward, but how do we go past that plateau? What are some of the things that organizations should be looking at?
Yeah, before we get to that, it's important to note a lot of behavioral safety implementations weren't implemented well. There was a whole cottage industry of behavioral safety quote experts who are finding checklists on the internet, and all of a sudden they become a consultant. And the reality of all this is, and it's true, it diluted the success and the strength of it because a bunch of folks came on board that didn't quite have the deeper knowledge of behavioral change, and there's the system component associated with it. So there's a reason why sometimes it didn't go as well as it should. And there's a reason why sometimes people, threw criticisms of behavioral safety because it was often implemented poorly. So that's just kind of a reality there. Two things I want to point out real quickly. First is system factors need to be addressed, and that's where the human performance folks are seizing the opportunity and doing a good job in a lot of ways of quit blaming people, fix the system. I think that's an important contribution. Behavioral safety really was safety culture training. I mentioned to folks I kind of cut my teeth on behavioral safety. What we were doing all those years ago, we were talking about Bandura. We were talking about locus of control, discretionary effort. It was safety culture training with a behavioral intervention kicker. So that's the way any type of training program should be. It should be more holistic, which we'll talk about in a second. But in terms of hitting plateaus, it's hard to do. Any kind of intervention, and you know this as well as anybody, when you're trying to change organizations, it takes time, it takes work, it takes effort, and it's hard. And behavioral safety is no different. The challenges in a nutshell is these cards would turn into kind of tick the box activities where, particularly when quotas were put in, so we've got a quota, do 2 a month, lo and behold, you get a flood of checklists coming in the last day of the month. And I would see some of them. They would be like a checklist. It would be a photocopied checklist.
Oh, no.
Like they did one. And I'm like, man, if you're going to fake it, at least put some effort into it. You know what I mean?
I remember we had a guest who was talking about people that had paid their kids to fill in lots of forms so that at the end of the month they could mail them in.
That's right. Well, win-win then, I guess. But
exactly. Training your kids at a young age to photocopy.
Yeah. I had a guy in Tulsa, Oklahoma one time tell me, and he kept repeating it, it's about people, not paper. It's about people, not paper. And he said it just enough times where that kind of stuck with me. It's not about the paper. And matter of fact, it's not about the observations as much as it is about the conversation. So one of the challenges with behavioral safety is everyone gets locked in on these cards. It's about people talking to each other. And the hope is when it's done correctly, if you're doing those observations the right way, you can have people talking to each other, card or no card. I'd rather have a good discussion without a piece of paper than fill something out, drop it off, and never talk about it. So part of the plateau is it became bureaucratic. Fill out the cards, get the cards, and people are tracking number of cards done. They're not looking, in some cases, even at the results. They're not looking at percentages. They're not looking at comments. They're not looking at suggested action items. They're just clicking the box. So that was a long answer. Sorry there for a short question. But I think one of the primary challenges with the plateau is it becomes programmatic instead of doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and in those instances, it may be a question of re-energizing what you've got to get a great buy-in, more involvement, because I agree so much with what you're saying. It's not about the piece of paper, it's about the quality of the conversation. I would look at piece of paper as a conversation starter, but not the actual act or accomplishment that's necessary.
What's in it for me is the big question, and there is value in charting percent safe score. So you get 5 or 6 things that, by the way, the people that are designing the card, and that's one of the problems with these off-the-shelf things or these online training things, it's like there's no employee engagement. We did research years ago, sponsored by NIOSH, looking at in a manufacturing facility. Half the group got interactive training, and they designed their own cards and how to use it. The other half got rote training, and here's the card, now go do it. The people that were actively involved in creating their own cards and rules for use used them 7 times more than the people that didn't.
Wow,
that's a
7
huge.
times
You
more.
Just don't see that. It's huge.
That's huge.
They had involvement. They had investment. They had investment in it. But you know, but there's a lot to do there. I mean, you want to see percentage-wise, what are we looking at? And it shouldn't be a hard hit, just checking the box. We should be looking at things like, the lockout, tagout, tying off, confined space entry. There's some serious things there we need to be paying attention to, and if we can get good data out of it. But the bottom line for employees is what's in it for me. Good conversations, changes being made, system improvements being made, versus these other efforts of trying to get involvement by quotas or incentives and all these artificial levers. It's like trying to manage the economy with these false artificial things that are short term. You need to have the fundamentals there, and the fundamental for an economy is one thing. The fundamentals here is simply what's in it for me from the employee perspective. I see value. And when that's done, you fight less on these plateaus. There are other things you can do, rotating steering teams, changing up the cards, adding human performance elements to the cards too. But those are ways to kind of keep things fresh and make it sort of a living, breathing, ongoing thing.
I love it. You touched a little bit on the human performance tools there, and looking at systems. Completely agree. I think that sometimes organizations get focused on it's just about the behavior and they forget about the system and how it creates it. Any further thoughts that you want to touch on the human performance side and the integration of those themes?
I think that's a really good question. Years ago, when behavioral safety took off, there were cognitive psychologists that were out there. Michael Topp was one that comes to mind, and there was a lot of good information there in terms of attitudes matter, what I'm thinking matters, what I'm feeling matters. And the behavioral folks kind of thumb their nose at it a bit, particularly because, they're looking at science and numbers and data, not feelings. But that's a mistake. And because as you and I have talked about many times, attitudes influence behavior and vice versa.
Yep.
And behaviors influence results. And dismissing cognitive and the psychology of it, it's funny, it's coming back now in terms of neuroscience. So we've kind of come back around. We've renamed it, just like the human performance folks are kind of renaming some of the stuff that was done by Decker and others years ago. It's like, nothing's new, but it's been repackaged and remarketed. And the neuroscience is a bit different than what was done before, but there are similarities. And my point of that is this dogmatic approach of one versus the other is just harmful. It's business driven, it's ego driven, it's territorial, and it's not helpful. We need a holistic approach. Responsible consultants are tying in all elements to try to help their clients, to try to fit their needs, meet their needs, help them out. And if it's cognitive, if it's behavioral, if it's human performance, it's all helpful. So that's the long answer. The short answer is there are things you can do if you've got an existing behavioral safety process, and there's benefits of doing that to make the card a little bit better. One of my frustrations is it becomes check the box. There should be questions on there like, what do you need? What scares you about the job? What tools would be helpful? Are there procedure changes? How can we improve this job? What scares you? What do you, these questions are open-ended questions, and they get people talking. And if we respond to them, and 17 people said, there's a scaffolding issue over here, we got to deal with it, and we respond to it, all of a sudden these cards are helping me because now I got this issue and it's been addressed. So it's more open, it's more interactive, it feels less audit-like, and it feels more conversational. So these peer checks, which is kind of the human performance way of getting at these observations, I think the peer checks integrated with behavioral safety cards is a good solution.
That's great comments, great insights. And on the cognitive side, any other thoughts you wanted to add in terms of elements? You brought in a lot of different themes there in terms of the value. I completely agree. I think behavioral components, you obviously need to shift behaviors to get the right results. But my attitude around safety, my sense of control of the risk, my sense of ownership over what I'm doing, all critical, important elements that need to be factored in beyond those conversations, but also they will help those conversations, because the more I see what's in it for me, the more I'm going to have put in effort and value in the conversations I'm having with a peer on how to improve safety.
I'd like to flip it around and ask you that question. I think you'd have more fun answering it than me. The personal why matters. And we've seen it with leaders that are switched on and those that aren't. And if you feel it, it's obvious. It's obviously different to people when you're talking about it, if you feel it versus you're saying it because you're supposed to say it. So that however we get to that point, that personal why, and I like how you kind of will press leaders, especially executives, what is your personal why? Within a few, why does this matter? And challenge people to really think about that. That we talk about, the personal five for us, the big five, whatever, in terms of, why we're staying safe. It changes the narrative from rule compliance to I'm doing this for something. I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it because I want to retire and break 80 playing golf before I die. I mean, whatever it is, that personal feeling and the reason and the mission why needs to be clear. It needs to be shared with people because, as you said, that's kind of the impetus for a lot of behavioral change efforts is you got to feel it first. And keeping in mind behavior shifts attitudes too. As behaviors get better, my attitudes get better. So that it's sort of the arrow goes both ways between attitudes and behaviors, but they're both important.
So Josh, I couldn't agree more. I think your point on the why is an important one. I made this reflection a couple years back. I started realizing that all the leaders I was talking to that were driving substantial changes in terms of safety performance, and there was one common trait. They all had a very strong why for why safety mattered, and they showed up a different way. And when you're talking about from a cognitive psychology standpoint, a lot of people are talking about the attitude, belief, mindset of a team member in terms of how I look at risk, how I look at safety in general, I look at my personal ownership, but I started realizing that there was this other element, which was how the leader was showing up. And as you said, as you start pushing people to think as to why do you care about safety and articulate that, it created a very strong conviction. And I've seen it in some organizations where you work with one leader who starts really thinking about what's my why story, my origin story around safety. And then they start conveying it with the leaders, and suddenly the leaders start paying attention. And they're like, okay, I need to do this. I need to actually drive observations. I need to show active care when I'm in the field. And so something as simple as really thinking about somebody's origin story, their why around safety, became so critical to drive a lot of the changes. So we've touched on different topics, Josh. We've talked a little bit about cognitive psychology. We talked a little bit about human performance tools. We've talked a little bit about how to bolster the behavior-based safety program that you've got. Maybe if it wasn't done well because you got it out of a Cracker Jack box at some point in time. What are some of the things that you can do to bring it to life in an organization, to drive improvements to the next level, to push through the plateau?
So from a big picture perspective, I was with a client years ago and they said, what's the key to improving safety culture? And I said, get input from people that are on the job, doing the job, and respond to it. And she's like, okay, what else? I'm like, there's nothing else. It's not true. There's more. But it's like I wanted to reinforce the point. You're not listening to your folks. There's all these fancy initiatives that are going out with all this beautiful conversations and posters, and you're not talking to people. So bringing it to life, that employee engagement piece is critical. You know, we mentioned ILOC, internal locus of control, from a guy named Rod in the 60s, and it's as important now as it was 60 years ago. My personal ownership and engagement is key. We talk about Bandura and self-efficacy, and I got to believe I can do it. There's a lot of these factors that have not gone out of style. It still matters. So we got to get input from people, get their engagement, whether it's with observations, whether it's with close calls, in a learning environment context. There's a lot of system ways where we need to get that engagement. But as an employee, I'm not stupid. And if you're trying and we're trying to get efforts and you're asking me questions, it could be procedures, it could be anything, it feels different to me. Even though it's not perfect, you're engaging me, you're listening to me, you're hearing me, and I appreciate the effort. And when companies do that, it's a night and day difference versus those that are rolling things out top down. Here it is, now go do it. Yeah, it alienates people, it frustrates them, and it leads to things that look good on paper, but they don't look good in reality.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we've talked about this before. When I simplify safety, I always talk about you need to have great methods, procedures, policies. So the quality of what you've got has to be top notch. Then you got to have acceptance, people following the rules when nobody's watching, doing the right thing, wanting to do it, wanting to follow policies and procedures. Because if you got great policies and procedures and nobody's following it, they look great on paper, but that's the extent of what you're getting, no real results. And then you need to have focus, attention on the job at hand, knowing of your limitations and things of that nature. So those are really the three components. And what you're touching on is I've never seen people want to do something if they had no say in this, right? It's what's in it for me. You listen to a peer of mine. It doesn't mean you need to drive a democracy or get to a consensus across the organization. But seeking that input, such a simple thing, is so key if you want people doing things.
And you get better decisions. I mean, you just mentioned rules. I've seen so many goofy blanket policies. I've seen people walking around with their safety glasses on with no lenses in them, saying hi to me like it's just the most normal thing in the world because they were upset they had to wear safety glasses in areas where they weren't needed. And I've got more extreme examples. I mean, I've got a bunch of goofy stories I'll tell you another time, but these blanket policies come down, and why aren't people following them? Because they don't make sense, because you never talk to the person that's doing the work in the first place. So, you know, it's just simple. You I don't know. You get better decisions when you talk to people. You get more acceptance from people because they have a say-so, like you said. And I'm getting a little bit wound up just because it upsets me sometimes, because I've done so many of these training sessions with employees for decades, hearing about all these issues. And it's just not reaching folks sometimes. And it's unfortunate because you have conscientious leaders trying to do the right thing. And that simple step, like you said, and maybe it's not so simple, but the important step of getting input from folks and responding to it brings life to everything we're doing. So from a larger perspective, when we're trying to re-energize behavioral safety, part of that is refresher training. It's really safety culture training, but focusing on behaviors, but also the cognitive side, like you said, also the human performance side. Integrate some of the human performance elements into behavioral safety processes. We do commitment workshop with leaders after training, so it doesn't feel like a one-time. We keep it fresh, keep it live. where they talk about
Mm-hmm.
specific things they're going to do moving forward to put their good intentions into place. There's a lot of things that need to be going on. It all starts with that belief and feeling it, but there's a lot of things we can do from a system perspective, from a behavioral perspective, to increase that discretionary effort, and ultimately better safety culture and reduction of serious injuries and fatalities, because those SIFs happen. We think everything's fine. All of a sudden there's an explosion, kills 8 people. We find out when we start doing an investigation after the fact, all these little things were out there and people knew about it and didn't say anything, and that's a problem. That's
a huge problem, right? Is what you don't know is more dangerous in many cases than anything else, because you're not dealing with it, you're not learning, you're not getting better. And every big incident that I've ever heard of always started with because there was information that existed that was known, but didn't get to a point where somebody could act on it and make sure it wouldn't get into something serious. Any other thoughts you'd bring in? You brought in a lot of really valuable ideas. We've kind of gone all over in different directions, but great input in terms of how to re-energize your safety programs. I love what you're talking about in terms of holistic approach. My biggest pet peeve in management as a whole has been anybody who's dogmatic about this one-size-fits-all approach to everything, because there's never such a thing. There's no silver bullet in management. If there was, whoever invented it would be down in a bunker somewhere, enjoying life on a beach next to the bunker and a huge mansion. There is no such thing as a silver bullet. It's a question of kind of combining learnings from different pieces. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I'll just echo what you just said. It's either ego or it's business interest. Yeah. When there's that strong of a dogma. I'll say this in closing, and this may sound a bit salesy. I don't mean it to, but it's go with what you know. What I know is assess on the front end, find out what you're good at, keep doing it. What you're not so good at, try to get better. Get a strategic plan together, and that's stuff that we help with, like who's going to do what when. Let's lay it out. I mean, it's just like you do in a football game. Many of us are lamenting college football may or may not continue this year. What a good coach. What is Nick Saban doing at Alabama? He's getting a specific game plan based on strengths and weaknesses and research, and there's a whole bunch of effort that goes into planning. Organizations should be doing the same thing. So assess, plan, and when you do training and other interventions, as you mentioned, make it more holistic. People need to feel it, and then work on sustain it. And that's from leaders' behaviors. That could be peer check. There's a lot of ways to sustain, but that's your path forward. I think beyond that plateau you had mentioned earlier.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show, Josh, and sharing quite a few great insights in terms of the next frontier of improvements and giving great ideas to people to start charting their next step in the journey. And I look forward to having you another time on the show. I'm sure we'll have other topics to explore.
That was fun, Eric. Thanks.
Like what we do? Share this on your socials and tell everyone. Thank you for listening to the Safety Guru on C-Suite Radio. Leave a legacy, distinguish yourself from the pack, grow your success, capture the hearts and minds of your teams, fuel your future. Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode, or listen to our sister show with the Ops Guru, Eric Michrowski.